That is, you have two rings. You have the inner ring of students, which is doing the discussing and the talking, and then the outer ring, which they are taking the notes and they are critically assessing how their partner in the inner circle is doing, participating in the conversation. So the trick is that the teacher is not allowed to interject. They are there just sort of get the conversation started and sort of facilitate those things. I found this to be really interesting. I personally was never involved in a lesson like this, so it was very interesting to see. And I definitely think it could work with a lot of different types of students. However, if you have a group that that might get at each other's throats, might possibly have some antagonistic tendencies, I could see this going awry very quickly. So certainly I'm sure there's a lot of different situations where this is a fantastic method to go by. So it just pays to be aware of the context and situation in the classroom. So, understanding by design, or the UBD lesson plan, people think of it as being backwards, I suppose, where you start by stating the goals of the lesson, the essential questions, like the bare minimums, or like the central ideas that you want to drive home, and then you go from there and then create the teaching plan for that. This actually makes more sense to me than working the other way. Maybe just because I've done more of them this way, but I mean, by more I mean like 3 to 1. I've done 3 this way and 1 another way, so I'm not sure if it's really in the lead, or if the numbers have anything to do with it. But this actually makes a lot more sense to me. So I think that I will be using this type of thinking when planning my teaching in the future versus anything else. So we also discovered the joys of Symbaloo, which has become my newest and greatest and most efficient way to procrastinate online. There's so many different little tiles to click on. There's so many great little apps and ideas and lesson plans and resources. It's awesome. And yeah, I've wasted a significant wasted, quote unquote. Time's never wasted when you're learning, I suppose. But I've definitely quote unquote wasted a whole lot of time on this website already, and it's only been my life for a few weeks. So, looking forward to a bright future of procrastination with Symbaloo. Module 6. So, this was actually the module that really, I felt, drove home things the most for me. This was probably the most meaningful module for me. We were given a text and asked to use 3 different reading strategies on it. And one of the things that was written in the assignment, you're supposed to have a dialogue with the text and not a monologue with the text. And this was something that struck home for me. A lot of times, when I'm reading, I read with a pen constantly. I underline things. I have a conversation with the author. I write things in the margins. When things annoy me, I make frowny faces at them in the margins. And reading, in general, has never really been a problem for me. But I see other kids, even my age, try to just attack these massive sheets, walls of text, and just try to plug through it just by reading. And I see how they struggle. And having a dialogue versus a monologue is definitely the best way to put it, at least for me. That made a ton of sense. It's so important not to just let the author talk at you. You have to get involved in the conversation. This goes back to what Alan November was saying, how you have to get the kids involved in their learning, and this applies to reading too. You have to get them involved with the reading, get them to put themselves into that conversation with the author in order for them to try to start getting the meaning out of the text. So, we learned about 3 different reading strategies, or we used 3 different reading strategies. Interact, discussion webs, and guided reading procedures. So, personally, my least favorite was the guided reading procedures, which involves them reading the text and then asking them to write down every single little detail they could remember from the text that they read. For me, that caused a lot of anxiety, and I can imagine how that would cause a lot of anxiety in other kids. Although, it didn't really affect how much I remembered. I remembered a ton doing it. It just made me really uncomfortable, and I can imagine that kids that are less comfortable with reading than I am would be completely turned off by it. So, the discussion webs is basically you have 2 columns, and in the middle you have like a question. Say, for example, you're reading an article on global warming or whatever. It really doesn't matter. And the question can be, is global warming affected by blank? So, and then on one side you have yes, on the other side you have no. And basically this helps you with that central meaning, that question that analyzes the central meaning of the text. You go through and you pick out the things that support it and the things that don't. And those are basically the things that create the meaning in the text. And interact is a way of reading where you ask, or you get a worksheet beforehand, and you're reading. You're in a group, and you're trying to make judgments on 4 questions that you're given before you read it. Basically, you're trying to use the text to make up your mind about those questions, and then after you read, you answer those questions, which generally aren't like just answers that you find in the text. They're opinion-based. You answer, agree or disagree with the questions, and then you guess what the other kids in your group answered. So, these reading strategies are definitely just ways to show kids what's meaningful in the text. Show them where to find the meaning. Where is it found? So, instead of just decoding reading, they're actually decoding the text. They're actually trying to find the useful pieces of information inside of it. For me, this was the central idea of this module. This was the central piece of empathy we were supposed to pick up by going through these reading strategies with a higher level piece of text. Just because a kid has problems with reading, it usually means they're just not a very skilled reader. Just because they're not a skilled reader doesn't mean they can't be. It doesn't mean that they're dumb. It doesn't mean that they're an invalid. It doesn't mean that they're stupid. It just means that they do not have the tools necessary to find the meaning in the text. Sometimes they're still too busy trying to just decode the text. Sometimes they're just overwhelmed. But what we have to do is teach the kids strategies that helps them pick out the meaning in the static that's in front of them. So, Module 7, the last module. One of the biggest things that I took from this, that I found the most interesting, was the article written by the person who's blind, who asks the question, like, if you want to know so badly about what it's like to be blind, why don't you just ask? They go on to talk about, the sensations of being blind, the things that they have to do, the different types of